All right, Jordan, I made it and everything is running in the background.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. We will get started in just a few minutes. We're going to start a few minutes late today. Okay, good morning. I'm going to go ahead and call the Land Use and Planning Committee to order. Our first item, as always, is roll call. And it looks like today we have Becerra, Contos, Harp, Hess, Jones, Merritt, Cheryl, and West present. We have Anderson, Ramos, Vasica, and Von Lossberg absent today. And Ramos, Councilman Ramos just joined us for the record. We have minutes to approve from last week, from April 21st. Are there any changes to those minutes? Okay, seeing none, those will be approved. This is, of course, another virtual meeting, and just for anyone joining us today, you're welcome to provide public comment by using the hand raise feature in Zoom. If you're watching the meeting on television or YouTube, you can join the Zoom meeting by visiting the city's agenda website. That's ci.missoula.mt.us/webcasts, and there you'll find a link to join the live meeting. If you join us, there's instructions there to join via Zoom and also to join by phone. If you're in Zoom and you want to give comment at any time, just use the hand raise feature and press *9 if you're a phone participant. So we have one. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items? Okay, seeing none, we have one regular agenda item, and that's a continuation of our interviews for the city council appointee to the planning board. We have two interviews today. Our first interview is scheduled at 11:10, and that applicant is not present in the meeting yet. So we'll just recess until 11:10, and we'll start with that first interview at that time. Okay, I'm not seeing our applicant who's scheduled for an 11:10 interview. Elizabeth Costello, if you are in the attendee list, can you use the hand raise function? Okay, so our next our first we have one interview scheduled at 11:10 and then another one at 11:30. Oh, it looks like Ellie just joined us. So we can be back in order, and we can start up with this first interview. So we have Ellie Costello here, and Ellie, you should be able to turn on your, yeah, there you go. Great. You should be able to unmute and everything now and participate in the meeting. I'll note for the record also that that Brian von Lossberg is in attendance now. What we have, so this is, of course, a meeting of the Land Use and Planning Committee. The City Council has a couple of appointees that serve on the Missoula City County Consolidated Planning Board. We have a list of prepared questions. Normally what we do is do kind of a round robin, but just for simplicity on Zoom, I'll run through the questions. And then at the end, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask us any questions. We have just shy of 20 minutes for the interview, and we have about 6 or 7 substantive questions. So I'll start just by asking you to please introduce yourself to the committee. Please feel free to highlight any useful experiences, knowledge, or perspectives that you would bring to the planning board.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellie. I know a few of your faces. It's nice to see you and to see the folks I don't know. I've been in Missoula for over 12 years now, working within nonprofits and businesses here in Missoula in a number of different fields, actually, which maybe you could see from my resume, which I had attached. Currently, I am the tasting room manager at Western Cider. I also own a small business called Black Bear Soups and Produce, where I grow produce. And right now, I primarily sell garlic and decorated garlic, but also make soups and sell those for events and things like that. Some of the things, that's kind of like the quick and short. I'm super interested in being a part of the planning board. This is actually the second time I've applied. I applied for the open mayoral appointment that was filled just this past winter, and did talk to the mayor about that position. I really became interested in planning in Missoula at first when I was engaging with the Missoula Invest Health study that happened a number of years ago. At that time, I was the executive director of the MUD project, and I was learning a lot about affordable housing and the different partnerships that get things done in the community between the city and the nonprofit sector and the business sector and all the other players that essentially have to work together, and how much planning impacts the direction that we take, and learning about the growth policies that we have, which I have a lot more to learn on those things. But that was the first point that I really realized that, oh, it would be wonderful to serve in some kind of role that helped assist in planning for the long term, because it could be really impactful. So from there, the other experiences that I've had, besides a lot of diverse connections around Missoula, so like I've worked in a lot of different types of fields here, from the arts sector to agriculture to being a university grad student to now the business sector. Besides that, I feel like I have an understanding of the processes that happen, even if I don't know kind of the all of the details that go into them at this point. So I like feel like I know what I'm getting myself into by submitting my application for the planning board. I've talked with a number of the planning board members about kind of the commitments that it takes, and what the role of the planning board is, and really being an advisory space and really using the tools that are already in existence to kind of guide what's happening, as opposed to bringing my own agenda a lot. And so that's kind of the understanding that I have from having had those conversations, and it seems really exciting to me. So I guess that's a quick introduction. I hope I'll dig into some more things then with your
Yeah,
other
that's great. That's very helpful. Thanks. The next question is that the planning board, as you mentioned, advises the city council and the board of county commissioners on land use issues. Planning board members are asked to weigh in on the growth policy, the zoning ordinance, and subdivision regulations. What about this work appeals to you, and are there any particular issues that you hope to address?
I think that what I've seen, I haven't read our whole growth policy. I've looked at it. It's long. I haven't sat down yet and read through it. I have read some of the synopsis of that policy, and started to engage with kind of the growing land use planning, actually, when they were doing the land, the rezoning maps for the county. I sat on the agricultural stakeholders subcommittee for that and got to have conversations. And part of why I'm interested in serving on this role is because I got a lot of value out of having those conversations with people, and seeing the different perspectives around the community. I think that I bring an interesting perspective, having been a person who for my whole adult career has worked within Missoula and watched it grow. And I yeah and so I'm interested in ensuring that those really good policies that we've already put into place, things around, like, we want to consider climate change. We are looking to provide housing options for every level and economic opportunities for every level in the community, and do that with also a transportation plan that serves those things in a really healthy way for both the environment and for our community. All of those things are already in there, and I really believe that if we're working hard towards them, that we can be successful. And so that's why have felt so drawn to it. My time sitting on that agricultural stakeholders committee, where we just met a couple times to kind of advise the rezoning map, was really fascinating too. There's a lot of conflicting interests that have to be weighed, and so it was really refreshing for me to be in a group that wasn't all my own demographic, and that I was having to be considerate of what other people's needs were. And it was also fascinating. I was the only non-land owning stakeholder on that agricultural subcommittee. And so I also feel like I bring a perspective that is one of, like, okay, well, how do we continue to have space for all of the people who are looking to have their futures here and their families here, and things like that. So it's interesting to be a voice for that. And I think there's a number of people who already are on the current planning board, but I can certainly offer that kind of grounding perspective too.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
So rezoning requests can be very contentious. Can you please describe your approach to reviewing a development proposal that seems to comply with the growth policy and other relevant regulations, but is opposed by a large amount of testimony to the planning board? And how would you weigh testimony geographically and otherwise?
That's a really thoughtful question. So, I mean, there's so many variables that could go into any single development. And so I think having to be considerate of, does that testimony come from people who are, I mean, I would like to take into account all testimony. I'd also like to kind of sift through and also see sometimes there's voices that are consistently louder than the others. And so being aware that there might be one voice that is perhaps like the most closely tied to whatever this development could be, that is not, the maybe a barrage of people who have been organized, or um, stakeholders that we often see appear. I would like to keep in mind that those things are always relevant, and that's why there are groups and stakeholders organized, but like make sure that I'm not outweighing their louder voice to what other perspectives there might be. Um, that was a very full question. How would I review it? I suppose I would read through and compare the points that both the proposed development, as well as the stakeholders, as well as any professionals within like the city and county who are offering us their perspectives on what's happening within that development. Try to bring those things together with an open mind. And I really look to my peers while I'm reviewing, so that the land board could be an active conversation, and I didn't come in with my perspective already solidified, I suppose. And besides that, I think I would learn a lot from the first time I did it, because that would be a new experience for me.
Sure. Thanks. A major tenet of the Our Missoula growth policy is the concept of focusing inward. The idea of focus inward is to direct new development into already developed areas in the community where services, employment centers, shopping, schools, and infrastructure already exist. Can you please describe the trade-offs between infill and greenfield development? And then there's a couple of follow-ups around both infill and greenfield development. But first of all, just please describe the trade-offs between infill and greenfield development.
Sure. With infill, it would be really great to be able to preserve some of that open space that we have. That is one of the biggest assets that was identified in the growth policy for the Missoula area, is having these open recreation areas and open lands around us, and this really lovely, healthy environment. And so infill would do a lot to preserve those assets, allowing for a lot of people to be able to be concentrated in density. A trade-off of that means that sometimes people are there. It's a much more urban lifestyle than what sometimes people are seeking out by moving to Montana. And I know there's been a lot of movement here since over even just 2020 of people who are looking for more open space. And so we may not be serving all of our community by creating only infill opportunities. And then at the same time, if we were to sprawl a little bit more, and I know that there's a thoughtful land use map, obviously, that shows where those areas of density could happen, and then also areas where there's a little less density. And I think that those trade-offs have been weighed, in that there's a lot of joint agricultural and residential areas there, and there's some areas that are really low density, and then hopefully the working within whatever the proposed development is to fit with that plan, so that we're not just sprawling over places that are identified as something we really should be saving, or vice versa.
Great. There's a couple of follow-ups. I'll just read them all, and because you've already touched on these to some extent. But first of all, is infill development a good idea? If so, do you have any thoughts on how to encourage or incentivize infill development? And secondly, what factors should be considered for land use and growth in the urban fringe, land that's in the county but adjacent to or near the city?
I do think infill is a good idea. I really believe in having more urban centers, creating more walkable spaces and bikeable spaces. I think that we can do a lot with good planning to make the infill feel unique to Missoula and healthy. And we're so lucky here to have a lot of regional and local architecture firms who really understand the character and quality of trying to do that in Missoula. So that's kind of the first part, that I think that would be great. And I think that that does fit. So while I know I mentioned that some people who are moving here are looking for some of that more open space, I think that as we continue to grow as a city, that there will be a lot of people who are looking for a more urban lifestyle too. I don't think it's one or the other. And so that infill can support that type of lifestyle and people who don't want to have to be managing, 2 acres or whatever, somewhere out on the fringes. Those urban fringe areas are super complicated. I know that there's in certain areas a lot of pushback, like the like Target Range comes to mind, of people who don't necessarily want to be annexed to the city and want to continue to have a certain type of lifestyle. So there's quite a bit of tension that I've seen in my time in Missoula over what types of development is going to happen in some of those spaces. And I don't have a set way of addressing those different perspectives. I think it would really have to be based on what the different development proposal was, and not on just one set of strict plans every single time for how we deal with the urban fringe, whether things are annexed or into the city or not, or they go onto sewer or not. I think really it depends on like both the pressures at the time of kind of that, what the community needs are and what feels like the highest priority, and if that development is serving those things, and also taking into account like current landowners or property owners and their needs, and trying to be thoughtful about ways that we could somehow retain the character of what the lifestyle they've been trying to live while in those spaces. I don't have a one single answer for that.
Yeah, a lot of nuance in that for sure. The growth policy, the Missoula growth policy, was adopted with broad public support. But in contrast, the planning board and the city council have reviewed numerous developments that actualize the growth policy, but are very contentious. Why do you think that's the case?
One thing could be people's memories are short. For one, not everyone was involved in that growth policy planning, and whether they're new to Missoula or they just didn't happen to be part of that process, that can, whatever their most important interest is at that moment, I think is going to be what's on their mind while they're reviewing a development or thinking about a development and new building. Times have definitely changed in Missoula just over the last couple of years, and I know that it's really challenging for people who have been living here and whose wages aren't increasing, though the cost of living is increasing a lot. And so it's a funny thing, because sometimes that can lead to people whose perspectives might be like, I don't want this development because I don't want things to change, because then, whatever is coming down the line in their perspective, versus, oh, this development could help alleviate some of the challenges that we're having and create some more housing options and allow for those costs to slowly, even out a little bit for affordable housing opportunities. So I think that there are those, it's whatever feels most emotional sometimes, I think, for some of those stakeholders. The growth policy also seems like, it seems so far to me that it is open-ended and adapted enough to have some interpretation in there. And so the other thing could be that people are interpreting what our goals are in that growth policy with one lens that's different than how either a developer might interpret it or somebody who's in support of a plan might interpret it. And so just being aware of the different angles, and hopefully I would get to learn about some of the more common ones pretty quickly, which I'm sure you guys already know all about.
Sorry, I'm fumbling with mute here.
Sometimes with Zoom, because there's a lot less back and forth, I'm just like, well, I'm still talking here. And yeah, it's just, it will be less weird sometime in the future.
Someday. Can you describe the relationship between land use and transportation as you see it?
Yeah. So a healthy transportation system would hopefully allow for people to, I really like the work that Ms. William Ocean has been doing in terms of trying to reduce the number of cars that are taking a trip all the way into downtown, or reducing the length of a trip. So maybe you're going to like a regional hub that helps you, hop on a bus or take a carpool or something like that. Um, and some of those things can really help concentrate. Um, it can help concentrate what we're like the impacts that we're doing to some of the lands around us by not having to create quite as many roads through those spaces if we're able to reduce the number of vehicles that are on them at any given time, is one example. Or mm, some of it could be that, I mean, this isn't exactly transportation, but the idea of having like uh retail based hubs that are providing services in areas of higher, or in areas not of higher density, but in areas where they're accessible to people who live in that area, so that they're not having to take transportation all the way across town to be able to access the same service. Those types of things I think really help reduce the overall congestion. It's supportive of not only like that smart land use, but also it's going to improve our environmental quality in a way that's going to allow people to have healthier experiences outside. So those are the ways I would point to it being connected.
Okay, great. Are there any changes that you would like to see in how the planning board does business or in the laws that it applies?
No, not in particular. I haven't considered things that I would want to change. I don't think I'm not trying to come in to change things necessarily, but to learn and grow and help guide in the directions that have been identified.
Great, thank you. Well, that's all of our substantive questions. I have a couple of kind of yes/no logistics questions. The planning board meets on the first and third Tuesdays of each month, beginning at 7 p.m. Given the workload, they've been adding a few special meetings lately, also on Tuesdays. Does your schedule generally accommodate this meeting time? And do you generally have time to review staff reports and other materials prior to the meeting?
Yes, that my schedule generally accommodates that meeting time. I do work some evenings, but usually not on Tuesdays. And I set the schedule that I work, and so I'm able to plan around consistent, um, any kind of consistent commitments. Yes, I would be able to review things before the meeting. I mean, I guess that depends on when I got the thing
I
too.
think they're generally posted at least 72 hours in advance.
Okay. Yeah. Then that feels like an appropriate time frame too, because then you have some weekend time um, prior to the meeting to be able to sit down and review. Yes.
Okay, great. And lastly, planning board alternate members attend meetings and participate in discussion like full members, but only vote when there is an absence among the full members. This is an alternate position. Are you willing to serve in that capacity?
Yes. Mhm.
Great. Okay, thanks. Well, that is all of our questions, and we're out of allotted time. We could take if you have any quick questions for us, or if any of my colleagues on the committee have any follow-up questions as well. But maybe start with you, Ellie. Do you have any questions for us?
Um, I actually feel very comfortable. I've done a lot of asking questions already of Vince Christo and Shane Morrissey, who I know Shane moved from this role into kind of the main or a voting committee member. So I did sit down with them over the summer when I started thinking about this last year, and talked with them about their experiences on the land use board and or the planning board. And so I feel like a lot of the questions I've had have been answered. So thank you. If there's something that you've heard that clearly I have a lot that I would want to learn and hopefully get some orientation as I came on. So if there's something that you feel like I should know that you've heard me mention, then feel free to fill it in.
Yeah. Nothing comes up. Nothing comes to mind for me, just off the top of my head. And I do appreciate all your research into the position and conversations with folks involved in your previous application. So we have one more interview immediately following this, and then this will go to the full council for action in the next. It may be next week or it may be the following week. So you'll hear back from us in early May at some point. So
Okay, sounds
okay.
great.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your application, and we will be back in touch soon.
Great. Well, thanks for your time, everyone. Good luck with the next meeting.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Okay. Our next interviewee is joining the meeting. So we have Sierra Farmer as our next interview, and Sierra is in the meeting here. And welcome, Sierra. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. Thanks for having me. It's good to see everyone. Do you want me to go ahead and start with the first question, or do you want to?
You bet. So just as a refresher, just please introduce yourself and feel free to highlight any useful experiences, knowledge, or perspectives that you bring to the planning board.
Okay. Yeah, so my name's Sierra Farmer. I grew up in Sealy Lake and moved to Missoula in junior high. So I've got 35 years of Missoula experience. And I still miss 93 Stop and Go and refer to it often if anyone misses it as much as I do. And so right now I'm a planner for the Montana DNRC for the Forest Management Bureau. So I deal mostly with MIPA and administrative rules. I recently just graduated with my master's in public administration from the University of Montana. And let's see, the experience I have with zoning specifically is I did get to be on the rezoning committee, or on the committee for the DNRC land on Reserve Street, that piece of property that most people probably know about that's been empty for a long time. And so I got to really see the inner workings of getting a piece of land rezoned and just the work that went into that. And that was really eye-opening for me. And then, I got to do the Government Citizens Academy with Heather and Gwen, which was awesome. And I learned just so much about our city that I didn't really know. And that was really eye-opening to me. And I just felt like after finishing grad school, I really wanted to get involved somehow and help out. And I thought that this seemed like a really good opportunity and something that I am interested in. I do nerd out on administrative rules and policy, so it seems like kind of a perfect fit. So that would be kind of my perspective. I guess I do like to do a lot of research. I'm balanced. I'm a natural problem solver, so that is definitely a skill I guess I would be bringing, is just being able to really be fair and balanced and see all perspectives.
Great, thank you. So the planning board advises the city council and the board of county commissioners on land use issues. Planning board members are asked to weigh in on the growth policy, the zoning ordinance, and subdivision regulations. What about this work appeals to you, and are there any particular issues that you hope to address?
Yeah, so I think what really appeals to me is I've seen Missoula's growth. I've seen it go from a small town to a big city, and I've seen where we've done a really good job, and I've seen us do some really maybe a poor job. And I think what really appeals to me is I want to help Missoula just be a little bit more proactive and less reactionary, and really look a little further down the road. And I really want policy to be clear, not to be confusing, to be fair. And I know that this isn't necessarily always like the most glamorous work, but it's so important, and so that's really what kind of brings me to this. And I think I don't have a specific issue, but I really just want to look to maintaining our neighborhoods and keeping our neighborhoods the way that we initially wanted them to be, but also keeping them, maintaining resources and maintaining the availability for everyone in Missoula and not just some of the elite few.
Great, thanks. So rezoning requests can often be very contentious. Can you please describe your approach to reviewing a development proposal that seems to comply with the growth policy and other relevant regulations, but is opposed by a large amount of testimony to the planning board? And then how would you weigh that testimony geographically and otherwise?
Yeah, so first I would just say public engagement, I think, is so important. And anytime people are paying attention, that's a win. And I think that really starts first with being transparent with the public and making sure that the public knows what you're actually deciding and that they are informed. I think sometimes the public can get frustrated if maybe they're finding out about something after the fact, or they don't feel like they've been informed about it in a timely fashion. And I think I also would take public comment and look at it more substantial comments versus just the not in my backyard type of comments, and really look at what issues did we not consider. So I with MIPA, that's a big piece of what we look at is what is the public bringing to us that we haven't already considered? And are we missing a really big piece of this plan that they are bringing to us? It's not really like a vote of like, I just don't want this in my backyard. It's really like, what have we missed? And also, are we disproportionately impacting a specific group? And really looking at like, how do those decisions impact the population as a whole? And I think if you're really doing your research and due diligence, you can feel good about those decisions, even if they're not always going to be popular decisions. But as long as they are fair and well balanced, and you've done your education and done your research, then you can feel good about those decisions and know that the public's voices are being heard.
Great, thanks. So a major tenet of our Missoula growth policy is the concept of focusing inward. The idea of focus inward is to direct new development into already developed areas in the community where services, employment centers, shopping, schools, and infrastructure already exist. Can you please describe the trade-offs between infill and greenfield development? And then there are a few follow-up questions, but I'll just give you that one first, just generally, those trade-offs.
Okay. I think just to be really, the really short answer is, I think infill is great, and I think that it's a great plan, but infill means you can't sprawl, so you have to go up. And a lot of times people don't like that, it's not always popular, especially in Missoula, where we really appreciate our view sheds. And that can be a trade-off that people aren't always really excited about. And then maintaining greenfield means, just less opportunities for development, right? With the housing crisis that we're having right now, it can be hard to set aside open space when people are screaming for housing. So I think those are to me the two really obvious trade-offs that you have to consider.
Yeah, and on the note of infill, is infill development a good idea? And if so, do you have any thoughts on how to encourage or incentive infill development?
Yes, I do. I do think infill is a good idea. I think we could look to some of our neighboring communities. You could look to Bozeman or Kalispell, or and just see the sprawl that's happening there. And that doesn't really reflect Missoula. That's not what we want here. I think that when you look at infill, it has so many other positive impacts, such as issues to the environment, just helping with public transportation, lowering pollution by increasing public transportation, not having to travel as far. It helps protect natural resources. It helps with, protecting the river corridor, wildlife, all the different vegetation that we have here. I think that infill can also help, with the growth that's happening with the WUI, with the wildland and urban interface, and encouraging people to stay within the city limits. I think that I do think it's a good idea, and I really appreciate the growth policy talking about that. I think for encouraging development, financial incentives probably speak the loudest to developers, and I think that there are some ways that the city could really incentivize that by promoting more affordable housing, doing things with finance bonding, using some of the TIF funding in other ways outside of specific neighborhoods, exploring maybe some different loan options for developers, even maybe some housing trusts that we could look at. Also just kind of reducing the financial barriers. So maybe looking at ways to reduce some of the permitting fees and some of the impact fees, and making it a little bit easier to do the development that we prioritize. I think that we could also look at ways to encourage developers to sort of incentivize doing more energy saving development, and really look at areas that we can maintain that demand for infill by helping developers pass those costs on to the customer. I think that ultimately how we really incentivize infill though is, we have to continue investing in the infrastructure that encourages infill. So the city has to continue looking at ways to have open space, complete streets, shared streets, looking at, everything from high-speed internet to, just really encouraging people to want to stay within the city and to continue infill. I think that is something that is the role of this committee, to kind of really find ways that encourage developers, but also encourage people to want to stay within the city.
Great, thank you. And on the other side of the coin, what factors should be considered for land use and growth in the urban fringe? That's land that's in the county, but adjacent to or near the city.
I think that the biggest ones that I would first factors to consider would be, sewer versus septic, and looking at some of those communities that need to, or maybe are hesitant to get onto this city sewer. And then also, fire resources, police resources. Those are all things that have to be considered when we're talking about maybe annexing some of these neighborhoods, like Target Range or out on Mullen. I think also, maybe looking at ways, again, just looking at ways of communities that are out within the WUI, and finding ways to help firefighters fight those types of fires, and finding ways to maybe monetize when the firefighters do have to respond. They are much more expensive issues, that do have to be considered on some of those fringe communities.
Thanks. The Missoula growth policy was adopted with broad public support, but in contrast, the planning board and the city council often review developments that actualize the growth policy, but are very contentious. And why do you think this is the case?
I think that because change is hard, and people don't really always, on paper, the growth policy sounds great. But then when something is going to be in your backyard, you might not feel so strongly. If there's floodplain regulations that suddenly impact you, or snow removal issues that suddenly impact you, that might actually not be as glamorous as it sounds on paper. And I think ultimately, we're seeing such exponential growth right now that it's hard. It's hard for all of us. We're all seeing it. And and we don't necessarily always want to change. So I think ultimately that is part of it, is people don't like change, and maybe there's a lot of people that probably didn't feel maybe included in the plan, or maybe feel like it doesn't apply to them. But these are issues that aren't going to make everyone happy. But you just have to kind of look at it in a fair and balanced way, I think.
Yeah, the planning board infrequently makes everyone happy.
Yeah.
Can you describe the relationship between land use and transportation as you see it?
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest issues that Missoula is going to face in the next, decade. I think that we've seen a lot of examples of where Missoula's transportation plan has been reactionary and not as proactive as maybe it could have been. And so I think that that's going to be a really big piece of our growth, is looking at how do we not only build mixed use, but how do we encourage it, and how do we actually make it usable? So it's one thing to have a bike lane, but we have to have bike lanes that are, have connectivity and can actually get you from one place to the next, that are safe and that people will use. I think transportation is a really big piece of that, of maintaining the compact development, is really looking inward to the city and seeing how we actually make transportation usable, safe, and various, and using various ways of transportation. So I think they really go hand in hand, in my opinion.
Okay, great. Are there any changes that you would like to see in how the planning board does business, or in the laws that it applies?
I don't have any specific laws that I would necessarily change, but I guess my one piece would just be, I'd love to see, some more diversity on the planning board, and get some varied perspectives on there. And I would love it if I could be one of those perspectives.
Great. A couple of kind of nuts and bolts questions to wrap us up. The planning board meets on Tuesdays, generally the first and third Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. They have been adding some special meetings, I think, on the second Tuesday a little bit in the past year. Does your schedule generally accommodate this meeting time and allow for reviewing the staff report and other materials attached to the agenda prior to the meeting?
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Now that I'm done with grad school, I just got to fill my time. I'm just itching to do something.
Yeah, void to fill. And then this, as you know, is an alternate position, and planning board alternate members attend meetings and participate in discussion like full members, but only vote when there's an absence of the full members. Are you willing to serve in that capacity?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we have a few minutes. If you have any questions for us, or if any members of the committee have any follow-up questions.
I don't have any questions, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Great. So we've had 4 highly qualified applicants for one position, and we have a really challenging deliberation ahead of us. One thing that, so this will go to the full council, and what I'm leaning toward doing is having this at the full council in 2 weeks on May 10th. And the reason for that is the committee had requested some information around what the makeup of the current planning board is in terms of occupation and other factors, geographic distribution, kind of just to create the diversity that you've mentioned. And so you'll hear from us for sure in the next couple of weeks. And I want to just thank you for your interest, your application, and we will be back in touch.
Great. Thank you. Thanks everyone for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Okay. So as I just mentioned to Ms. Farmer, I see 2 options. We could get the requested information and take care of this during committee reports on Monday, and have a little deliberation on Monday, or we could have this back next week for discussion and deliberation. Is there any preference? Brian?
It's not a strong one, but I think generally it's good for us to treat our committee meetings as good work meetings. We tend to try to avoid, except where we can't, hashing through that at committee reports. Sometimes it's necessary. So I'd call it a very slight preference. That's
Okay.
2 cents.
And that makes perfect sense to me. Heather, and then Amber?
I concur with Brian. I think the committee time it seems more appropriate. I think we're all more in our game during committee meetings versus in committee reports. Hearing I think it's more effective.
Okay.
I agree as well. I just think it's a better, more appropriate time to be doing this type of work. So that would be my preference.
Great. So I'm going to request that information, and I apologize for not getting that for this week, but I'll request the information on the current makeup of the planning board from our city staff, and send that out. Is there any other information that anyone needs in order to make a good decision here, Heather?
Just a reminder to also get their terms corrected so that we have that. But having that occupation background, I think, is a really, really great lens that we get to see people through, not just what they speak to in those questions today. And we had some really fantastic answers, but it also just demonstrates that that there's value in being able to see what they're seeing because of the work that they do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mirta?
I wonder if we could get a word in the city they live in. I know that we probably I don't necessarily need to know where the address, but I think it'd be good to see how each ward is represented.
Sure. I can request that as well. Okay, great. Is there any public comment on the planning board appointment process? Seeing none. Heather, you have another comment?
I might even suggest fine tuning Myrta's suggestion. Go ask them for their neighborhood.
Great, we can get that off the application, so I'll make sure that we get that as well. Okay. Anything further for today? Okay. Thank you, everyone. We will be adjourned.